In the early 1960s, the world was desperately trying to make sense of the unimaginable. How could completely ordinary people actively participate in atrocities that shattered basic human morality? This wasn't just some historical curiosity. It was a heavy, haunting question hanging over the entire post-war era. We had a desperate need to understand the absolute darkest capabilities of human nature. Society was essentially forced to look in the mirror and ask, is the capacity for unthinkable harm limited to just a few cruel individuals, or is it a dormant trait hiding quietly inside the average citizen?
I want you to take a moment and genuinely consider a truly terrifying scenario. What would you do if a legitimate authority figure looked you in the eye and ordered you to hurt another human being? Now, it's deeply comforting to believe that our morality is this absolute, unbreakable force. Most of us assume without a second thought that we'd instantly refuse. We hold so tightly to the conviction that our personal ethics are vastly stronger than any instinct to just obey.
But in 1961, that comforting assumption was completely shattered. There is a terrifying gap between what we believe we would do and what humanity actually does. A young psychologist at Yale University named Stanley Milgram set out to test this exact dynamic. And here's the thing, he didn't go looking for extremists. He deliberately recruited everyday people. We're talking teachers, factory workers, parents. He wanted to uncover a deeply unsettling psychological truth about what happens when ordinary morality collides head-on with extraordinary obedience.
Milgram effectively built a trap, and he hid it in plain sight. We can call it the laboratory illusion. Participants walked into this formidable, highly professional setting at a prestigious university. They signed official forms, and they were greeted by a calm, confident researcher wearing a crisp white lab coat. They were told they were just participating in a standard, routine study about memory and learning. The whole environment was sterile, authoritative, and deeply disarming. It perfectly masked the true nature of what was about to unfold. Let's break down the cold, mechanical rules of the trap these participants walked into. The procedure was cunningly designed as a simple series of steps. The volunteer was assigned the role of the teacher, while another participant, who was secretly an actor working for Milgram, was assigned the role of the learner. The task seemed straightforward enough. Read pairs of words for a memory test and administer an electric shock for every single incorrect answer. With each mistake, the voltage was to increase step by step. But what the volunteers absolutely did not know was that the shocks were completely fake. The memory test was just a diversion. The real focus of this explainer and of Milgram's entire study is what happened when ordinary people were told to push that button.
You can actually trace the deliberate escalation of this psychological pressure cooker. In the initial minutes, the session felt totally harmless. The learner made routine mistakes and the teacher administered low-level shocks. But as that voltage increased, the tension built to a truly excruciating level. The teacher, the real subject of the experiment, began to visibly panic. They started sweating, their hands trembled. They wiped their foreheads and let out these nervous, desperate laughs, torn violently between their own empathy and their perceived obligation. By the late session, the actor in the other room was intentionally escalating their reactions. They were pounding on the wall, desperately complaining, and screaming for the experiment to stop.
When the volunteers hesitated, frozen by the agonizing sounds coming from the next room, they inevitably turned to the researcher for guidance. And the researcher responded with a quiet, chilling phrase. The experiment requires that you continue. That was it. There were no physical threats. There was absolutely no coercion by force. There was only the quiet, unwavering authority of a man in a lab coat delivering firm, calm prompts. It was the crushing weight of scientific expectation pressing directly down on the human conscience.
The climax of this study revealed a devastating reality. Despite hearing what they firmly believed were the genuine, agonizing cries of pain from an innocent stranger, a significant majority of the participants continued administering those shocks. They went all the way to the absolute highest voltage levels on the board. These results defied every single expectation and completely horrified the watching world. It proved that under the right conditions, the quiet command of an authority figure is more than enough to completely override our most basic human empathy.
To even begin to understand this horror, we have to look at the intense moral conflict tearing these participants apart. They weren't heartless monsters. They were not indifferent to the suffering they believed they were causing. In fact, many of them protested verbally. They exhibited intense, visible distress. They kept glancing back at the researcher, silently begging for permission to stop the pain. But what they were truly looking for was reassurance. They needed a sign from the authority figure that the moral responsibility for the suffering did not rest on their own shoulders.
And that brings us to the terrifying psychological mechanism at the very core of this event, displaced responsibility. This is a profound psychological shift where individuals detach from the real-world consequences of their actions. They begin to feel that the moral weight has been transferred away from them and onto a legitimate authority figure. When operating within what they perceive as a valid system, ordinary people can commit unthinkable acts. And the chilling part is, they don't do it out of malice, but because they no longer view themselves as the author of their own actions. The system itself absorbs the guilt.
The core insights of Milgram's experiment remain just as disturbing today as they were back in 1961. Human behavior is profoundly shaped by the structures around us. When we're placed in controlled environments, obedience becomes completely normalized. Situational power can, and very often does, overpower our most deeply held personal values. It forces us to confront an incredibly uncomfortable reality. Good character alone does not dictate moral action. Context and pressure play a terrifyingly significant role in what we're actually capable of.
We are ultimately left looking at the incredibly fragile balance between obedience and conscience. In a modern world filled with complex institutions, corporate hierarchies, and powerful authority figures, our awareness is our most vital tool. Understanding just how easily responsibility can feel displaced is the very first step toward developing true critical thinking. It serves as a stark, permanent reminder to remain morally conscious, to always question the systems we operate within, and to never blindly trust that the structure will make the right moral choice for us.
Ultimately, Milgram's experiment isn't just a story about a laboratory in the 1960s, it's a mirror held straight up to human nature itself. It strips away our comforting illusions and leaves us with a haunting silence. So, as we conclude this explainer, you really have to ask yourself, at what point do you choose to stop following orders and start listening to your own moral compass? When the pressure mounts, the room gets quiet, and the authority figure tells you to continue, what would you do?